So welcome to everybody here in Balmaclellan in the Smiddy and everyone online, wherever you are across the world. So rather exciting night tonight, talking about the Galloway Gaelic Otherworld and what can place names tell us about our past. And just a quick plug, my name is McNab Laurie, working on the Galloway Glens project. If you haven't heard of the Galloway Glens project, well, you've very nearly missed it, I'm afraid. We've actually got 2 weeks left. I do want to say, this is not our last evening event though. Monday night we have an evening event called The Time Travelling Ecologist. And we have 4 people talking about historic maps and what this can tell us about where we should be focusing our efforts with biodiversity today. So that's online as well, or in person over in Dalry Town Hall. So the plan tonight, now that I've worked everyone to a white-hot frenzy with excitement about the event ahead of us, the event's being recorded, so will be polished and put online afterwards. I'll hand over to Michael in a moment. We'll have the main body of the event, and then we'll take questions. I'll take questions in person or questions online. And many thanks to National Lottery Heritage Fund that fund the event that we're seeing tonight, but particular thanks to Michael Ansell. If I could hand you over, please, Michael.
Tang voor McNab, agus fisker ma hula dunya, hamigle holich, je breen, rave, and ju muyen, skielichten, agus animanache rogach, anan gal gailev, agus sacharik. Agus Anishanam Bjarla. Thanks very much, McNab, and good evening, everyone. I'm very pleased to be speaking to you today on some Gaelic origin, otherworld stories and place names of Galloway and Carrick. And that's the last I'm going to refer to the notes. So we'll start off then with the subject in hand. This is actually a huge subject, and I would say at the beginning that I'm only scratching the surface of what can be discerned by looking at place names and folk tales of Galloway and Carrick in terms of the otherworld or supernatural beliefs that once existed. I would say, a bit of a plug, that the inspiration, if I can call it that, for this talk came from editing the book that you see here, Galloway, the Lost Province of Gaelic Scotland. This was the proceeds of a conference that the Glencairn Story held in the Cat Strand in New Galloway in 2018. It took quite a while to come out, but in the process of researching my own chapter in here about the Gaelic toponymy of the mountains of Galloway, and also editing some of the other papers in here, I came to realize the rich store of material that exists in Galloway about the supernatural and the otherworld, if I can call it that. And that's been fermenting, as it were, as an idea, and I took the opportunity after talking to McNab to put this talk on. But it is very much a first stab at the subject, really. The book is available from myself by email there. It's actually, we don't have too many copies left. I've brought some here tonight in case anybody wants one, or John Deere Publishers or the Gaelic Books Society. We shouldn't be surprised, really, that there is such a rich Gaelic heritage in Galloway. As you can see from the map here, the aerial photograph here, it's very much a Gaelic peninsula sticking out into Sruna Moyle, surrounded by Gaelic-speaking areas in the past on 3 sides. So that was the case from perhaps the 9th century through to around the 17th century. Dates are a little bit debated, but you know, there's a long Gaelic heritage in this part of the world, and it's really should be seen as part of a continuum that stretched from Cork in Southern Ireland all the way up to Caithness, Gaelic-speaking area. I need to make a bit of a health warning at the beginning. Like I said at the start, this is very much an initial survey. Much more is to be done and can be done about this subject. A warning also that early forms of the place names involved here are almost wholly lacking. These particular types of place names we're talking about here are not, by and large, settlement names. Settlement names are the ones that got recorded in charters, names of farms, names of villages, and so on. But what we're talking about that had names that were named for supernatural beings or ghosts or whatever, they were minor features in the landscape. They tended to be hills and valleys and slocks and so on. So very often the first evidence we have of these names is actually the Ordnance Survey first edition in this area, surveyed around 1850. So we have to be cautious. And as I say here, other derivations are available in almost all cases. We need to watch out for false friends. I think Simon Taylor was the chap who coined this phrase in relation to place name studies. Some words that you would immediately look at and say, well, that means X. It has an alternative meaning Y, and the appearance in place names is almost identical. A few examples here. Fionn could refer to Fionn MacCool, the legendary hero of Gaelic society, really. It also means white. Morich, a seaplane, in an anglicized form, is very like the word for a mermaid that I'll be coming on to. Oisin is the son of Fionn MacCool, but it also means a corner in the road. And the pronunciation, the sound, when it's anglicized, is pretty much indistinguishable. Arach means a monster, but it also means, or it's similar to a word for, in the genitive singular, for adder, a snake. So, you have to be careful here. Also, the spring word, it's quite similar in anglicized place names. So, with that warning ringing in your ears, I'll proceed. The agenda, these are the Creature os Natera I want to talk about. I use that term because that's the word that appears in the stories from Argyll in relation to the first item on the agenda there, An Sach Ban, the white sack. And that's described as a creature os Natera. So I'll talk about the white sack, Fór or Far, giant, Aracht, monster, Murach, a mermaid, Joan, a demon, Skal, ghost, and Cailleach, or Cailleach, and Shean, relating to fairy mounds. Then I'll talk a little bit about Fianna and Fionn MacCool and his band, and I'll finish off by talking a little bit about how Otherworld, or supernatural, should I say, pagan areas have been Christianized and, in a sense, turned into another use. So that's the agenda. The first one is An Sach Ban. And let me see if I can find the poem. White sack is a kind of inauspicious name for a ghost, doesn't it? Doesn't sound particularly spooky, but and it's not rendered very spookily initially in Trotter's book, Galloway Gossip. He's a bit of a comic, Trotter, and this is actually the only illustration in the Gaelic word of An Sach Ban, believe it or not. And he calls this Piste and the Puddin's ghost, or the Puddin's ghost. And it's actually the Sach Ban, but I'll explain that in a second. He has a poem about it. I'm just going to read this quickly. At nicht when Piste gaed to bed, I should have put my other specs on for this. Saunders McCormick guard him gang, down to the cupboard, there to steal a bloody puddin, thick and lang. His granny yet jaloused fu wheel that why her puddin's eye was lost. Said if he did another steal, he'd surely see a puddin's ghost. Next nicht, when coming fae the school at 6:30 at nicht, When mair nor halfway through the merse, poor Pisty got a fearfu fricht. Starting throughout the reeds amang, soon after the lane had crossed, something aside him rout alang, looked mortal like a puddin's ghost. With fricht his mouth it opened wide, his hair with horror stood an end. He got sae fleet, if it was best to stan or rin, he didna ken. At last he ran, but in a wee, the one his hat blew off and lost. He looked ahin, and there he did see, close at his heels, the puddin's ghost. Poor Pisty ran with might and main, and reart wi' a' his strength and force, but whether he ran fast or slow, the puddin at his heels was close. When nor unto the dyke he came, to his cell be good to boast, yet would now get safely hame and see nae mair the puddin's ghost. But haith it soon lap o'er the dyke, and after him ran up the hill, and when into the house he got, poor Pusty on his knees he fell. His granny, weshing o' the floor, thought Pisty had his senses lost. Says Granny, it's the sicky bawn. Cries Pisty, here's the puddin's ghost. And when he got into his bed, son as McCormick, he did tell it when he did a puddin want, he'd better gang and steal it his cell. He also telt him he'd as weel gang barefoot out mang snaw and frost, as he'd another puddin steal and see another puddin's ghost. So you might think that's just a humorous little tale, but it actually contains several elements of the Ansach Ban stories that's so prevalent in the southwest of the Scottish Gaeltacht. And he also mentions in the sort of preface to this poem, he says, "Weel, when Pisty was a lad, about 14, he saw the Sach Bon." That's an interesting pronunciation of ban, white. It's more an Irish pronunciation. Or sedge band, as the genteel folk cast. It mostly rose along afore a body, and it means sudden death in the house it stops at. So there's a much more serious aspect to Trotter recording this about the Sach ban in Galloway. But he, as he does in most of his stories, he dresses it up in quite a humorous style. But, looking at this, you may just dismiss this as another one of Trotter's kind of wild stories. But these clues within the poem and in his preface tell you that this is related to the Sach ban more widely experienced. And you find it here, for example, and my thanks to Ronnie Black for pointing out the collection of stories here. But a chap called McLagan went around Argyll in particular collecting folklore in the late 19th century, and there's 9,200 pages there, and Ronnie has been going through it and pointed out at least 20 separate stories relating to Ansach Ban in essentially mostly in the Argyll area. Huge concentration of these fiends in Islay, Kintyre, and around Loch Gilphead for some reason, but they existed all over the southwest Gaeltacht. And you can see where these stories have been plotted on the map, and an interesting geographic distribution. It's recorded in the Irish of Rathlin as well. So there's a very distinct southwest focus here. The one in the north at Loch Crerar, I think, is actually a mistaken identity for one in Kintyre. So it's even more concentrated perhaps than it looks in this map here. So characteristics of the Sach ban that you pick up from the McLagan manuscript stories, it's essentially, it looks like a large white shapeless sack filled with something soft. And it sometimes shape shifts. I haven't come across anywhere else where it shape shifted into a pudding. It was largely nocturnal, particularly around the New Year. And it did what Trotter was kind of alluding to. It rowed along a hinny and got in amongst your feet and tripped you over and tumbled you. And thereby potentially killing you. It killed people, or it squeezed you against the dike, or it bit your heels. This is a very unpleasant fiend we're talking about here. So the people giving these stories to McLagan were clear that this was a supernatural being. Ní Olach was deterred by dogs, and it foretold death, and that's again something else that appears in the Trotter story and poem. Particularly could be found along the shoreline rather than inland. So perhaps up here in the Glenkens we would be spared the sack ban. The second creature I'd like to talk about is the for or far or father, depending on where you come from, or even fother. This is a word in Gaelic. It exists in Scots Gaelic today. It doesn't exist in Irish any longer. Derived from Fomor, which is a Fomorian, a mythical demon from Irish legendary history. And it means a giant, big man, fierce, barbarous being. Essentially a giant. We don't know obviously what these looked like, but this is an illustration done by John Duncan, painted by John Duncan, turn of the 20th century, and I think this is in Dundee Art Gallery. And this is his imagining of the Fomorians, how they would look, a motley crew of giants, if ever I've seen one. A distribution of place names relating to the different varieties of this word for giant or mythical being can be seen on this map here. And I would say that Professor Robbie O'Malley has done a study on the dialectal distribution of this term for, and has actually found about 24 different varieties of pronunciation and spelling of this word across Scotland. So it's you can see some of the varieties of how it's described. But as you can see again, very much a West Highland, Galloway. Isle of Man was a particular giant's hotspot. But of course, the distribution of these things is biased by where people have looked for them or recorded them or whatever. And we know that George Broderick has done a particularly intensive study of place names and field names on the Isle of Man, which is why it's basically peppered with giant place names. But the ones I want to talk about just now briefly are the ones that I think potentially represent the giant word in Galloway. And those are the four that I've circled in red there: Danorach, Milfor, and Cairnfor, and possibly Millfire. If we allow that Galloway Gaelic also had the far pronunciation as well as for, then I think that could well lead to an anglicisation form of Millfire. So Millfire just up the road could be a giant hill. The types of haunts that these beings frequented in the distribution map just before, commonly hills and crags, Miall, Tor, Croch, Crech. They were found in archaeology. You know, people like to ascribe a mythical origin to a cairn or a dune or something like that. But dune, cairn, lech, tai, Uig, cave, Uav, and also inlets in the sea, Porscht and Sloch. That's where you need to go if you want to find a giant around here. Probably the most famous one is in Ireland. Now, this is Fomarach is supposedly existing now in Irish only as a literary form, so it's quite rare in place names. But one of the names for the Giant's Causeway is Clochan na Fomarach. And we have a nice potential pairing of this term on the coast of the Rins of Galloway here. This is Dunorach, not far north of the Mull of Galloway on the west coast of the Rins, and that could well be Dun Orach, the giants' fort, if I can call it that. And you can see on the picture here, remarkably well preserved rampart looking out onto this promontory fort. And that looks quite civilized, doesn't it? You could imagine pitching your tent and spending some time on there with the giant, perhaps. But that's what you see just over there. You wouldn't want to roll out of your sleeping bag. It's the most dramatic scene, and I think people were always imbuing archaeological, mysterious sites with mythological beings and giants and ghosts and such like, particularly in such dramatic circumstances like this. And that shows you the little peninsula that Dunorach is sitting on, stuck out into the Irish Sea, basically. Trotter published another tale in the Wigtonshire edition of Galloway Gossip about the origin of the Isle of Man. I think this is fairly common in Gaelic circles. But in this particular one, he says that an immense giant, I never heard its name, used in the early ages of this world to inhabit the wilds of Minnigaff and the Glen Kens. We're obviously speaking to you from the Glen Kens here, so it's to this area we'll head just now. But Minnigaff first, there is a cairn looking out over the Cree Valley to the hills of the Merrick and so on there. You can see in the middle distance. And that's today called Cairn 4, but on the Blaau map it was Carn Foar. And that gives a good clue to the bisyllabic pronunciation that you would expect from Carn Foar. And it's similar in pronunciation to the place names you find in the Isle of Man. So that gives us a clue that the Gaelic in Galloway was quite similar to that spoken in the Isle of Man. So this cairn was obviously suspected as being the abode of one of these giants in the Cree Valley. Coming inland from the last location, we coming up the road between Newton Stewart and New Galloway is Mill 4, and this is near Cairnsmore of Fleet. It's sort of north of Cairnsmore of Fleet, and that could possibly be Miall Thor, the giant's mountain, the giant's lump, to put it in another way. And just a few miles north of that, coming closer to Craigencally and Clattering Shaws, is another Mill 4, which again could be Miall Thor, Giant's Hill. And just up the road from us here just now is Mill Fire, I mentioned earlier. And this rather dramatic quarry on Mill Fire that you see just now, this hill could represent another giant's mountain. Creature Osnadra a tree. The third one is Aracht. And that's described by Dwelly's, in Dwelly's dictionary, as a spectre, apparition, dwarf, or a centaur. But confusingly, it's in the O'Donnell Irish dictionary, it's a spectre, a monster, and a giant. So I don't know how we juxtapose giants and dwarfs here, but nowadays it kind of means a monstrous being, not necessarily a supernatural one, as could be seen in the sense of this movie. I don't know if any of you have seen this. It's an Irish language film. I would thoroughly recommend it. It's not a bunch of laughs. The title kind of gives it away, Monster, but it's well worth looking at for its atmospheric shooting and the scenery, and it's just a good movie. A false friend is in front of us now because this is Nahar, a word related to the word adder. And in the genitive singular, it's narach. And that can look very much like the word for aracht with the article in place names. So you kind of pays your money and takes your choice. Now, Loch Narach in the wilds of the Galloway Highlands could be Loch Narach, the Adder's Loch, or Loch an Aracht, the Loch of the Monster. Darnarach today is an abandoned farm up on the borders of, actually just into Carrick now. It's surrounded by wind, it's basically in the middle of a wind farm now, but that is either Dura Narach, Adder's copse, or Monster's copse. Early spelling there of Darnaracht on Blau, you see at the bottom, indicates that may well be the Monster's Wood. Loch Arach up the Cree Valley could be, may well be Monster's Loch, some kind of monster living in there. And Clash Narach, that's near Loch Naw in the Northern Rins. That could be the ditch of the Adders or the ditch of the Monster. And this one in Stonykirk, Knockanarach, is the monster, the Adder word again. So they get around these beings. They're peppered all over the Galloway landscape, essentially. Craterus Nadra 4, Murach. This word doesn't exist in Scottish Gaelic now. It's obsolete according to Dwelly. So I'm using the Irish form here as denoted by Professor O'Malley in the Galloway book. But this has spawned a Scots Galloway word, Murach, that you see there, and it means a mermaid. Murach meaning a mermaid, supernatural sea creature. This is a statue up near Tain, somewhere in the shoreline, and the sea comes up to cover the fins. It must be quite a nice thing to see. Trotter again has a quote about mermaids. Odd queer craters, mermaids is the queer craters, mermaids is the queerest. There used to be plenty of baith mermaids and murrachs about the shores of Galloway, and I'm no saying, but there's maybe an odd yin there a while yet. Deed, a hey Kent Mairner ye fella, it declared he had seen them, aye, and mayst grup at them forby. So I don't know exactly what happened when they grup at them, but that kind of implies that there's a semantic difference between mermaids and murrachs there, but I haven't quite got to the bottom of that. But the origin of the term murrach, it comes from Middle Irish murdachan. Originally that was a compound word meaning sea music or sea chanting. It became the siren song with classical influences, and then the siren, a legendary sea woman, and latterly exclusively a female mermaid. And it's mutated through time to Murach and the Scots form Murach that we have in this area. And where do we find place names of this type? Well, again, the Rins is quite a happy hunting ground for mermaids. This is today called Sloch na Morach in Kirkmaiden on the west coast of the Rins, not that far from Dunorach that we saw earlier. And that's the Sloch na Murach, probably. The Sloch is a gully. So we can imagine mermaids sitting, basking down in that cove there. I think a lot of the time it was seals, you know, making the noises that seals make that sort of sparked this kind of thing. Exactly the same name occurs in the North Rins in Kirkcombe, or Kirkcombe should I say. Sloch na Moro, Sloch na Murach, again a favoured type of habitat for mermaids. And overlooked by what's now a £3 million house, Port Murray, which on the Blau map was Port Morrow, which is probably Porscht nam Murach in Maidens, just in Carrick, South Ayrshire. We need to be a little cautious with the Murach word and place names that look like it's derived from the mermaid, because there's one of our false friends. I just want to mention a few examples where we can be caught out here. This Morich seaplane or Murach, a breakwater strip, a level strip along the sea coast, can be confused with the mermaid word, and it means something quite different. This is Mairoch Point today in Kirkmaiden, which is the seaplane, and you can see the topography is quite different from the kind of sloch inhabited mermaid features that we saw earlier. Another one, Morach over in Whithorn. I don't think this is a mermaid place. This is, I think, a seaplane from the flat fields going alongside the coast there. Creaturos natera a coig, Joan, for a demon or evil spirit. The most famous one in Galloway, I would say, most famous place name incorporating this demon word is what we call now Ben John, or is what's shown in the map as Ben John, which overlooks the Solway coast at Auchenlary. This is a view taken from Knockbrecks, painted by Anne Butler as part of the Borg Field Names project. And this is Devil's or Demon's Mountain. On the Roy map, which is around 1750, you can see on the right-hand side circled place name Ben Joen. It's written D-E-W-E-N by the look of it. And that's a close approximation of the pronunciation of the Gaelic Bain Joan, Devil Mountain. And very often these, sorry, I'm mixing up my devils and demons here, but this is demons we're talking about. The demon word in Gaelic gets anglicised in Galloway as John, because the Scots way of pronouncing the personal name John Patterson will be evidence this is Joan. So it lends itself to becoming, it just looks a bit demonic. And these are some of the Joan sites in southwest Scotland. I don't know quite why demons liked ridges so much, but Drumjohn is Demon's Ridge, and there's several of those. Creaturos natera Shia, Skal, a ghost or spectre. I'll just show a couple of these. Darn Shaw at Carsfairn doesn't look as though it would come from that, but the early 1654 spelling indicates that it could well be Durin and Skal, the copse of the ghosts or spectres. And this is the place today. It's a ruined house. I don't know if you'd be happy to spend the night there. But up until 30 years ago, that was occupied, and it's quite an idyllic spot beside the Duch. Todd was a school master, a dominie down in Kirkmaiden, and he wrote a book about the area. It's just recently been published, actually. It was in manuscript form for a long time. And he records a place called Dunan Scale or Skal, and he calls it the Hill of the Apparition, a hill in Low Kirgy, Fairy Hill. Now I think it's called Fairy Glen Hill in the area, next to the Witch's Glen. And it's down in the bottom right-hand corner of that map. And that essentially is the fort of the ghost. Cailleach. This is an important one for our area of the Glen Kens. How are we doing time-wise?
35 minutes, but it's shot by.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe you. I just want to know how much time I can dwell on this one. The Cailleach is essentially one of the most prolific early Gaelic mythological beings. There's a huge literature on this being that I couldn't attempt to summarize, but one aspect of it seems to survive in Galloway and in the Glenkens in particular, and that is an example or two examples of the early Gaelic origin and sovereignty legend. Some of you in the room will be familiar with Craig na Cailleach. This is up the valley of the Blackwater of Dee, and that's a picture of the crag, and this means the rock or the crag of the hag or the old woman. And Professor Willie Gillies wrote a paper entitled "The King, the Goddess and Family Origins in Galloway." I think it was about 2012 or 13, and he describes how the story that some of us are familiar with in respect of Craig na Cailleach and the old wife there is part of this early Gaelic sovereignty tale. And it was first recorded in Barber's Bruce. This is a poem in Scots composed, I think it was around 1371. And, you know, it's a long, long poem, but boiling it down to its essentials in relation to Craig na Cailleach, I should say, is we had a king on the run, that's to say Robert the Bruce. His fortunes were very much low ebb, and he'd arranged to meet his surviving men who were being pursued all over the place at Craig na Cailleach. And the guidwife there, the Cailleach, welcomes him in and offers her sons by three different fathers, take note. Mackay, Murracha, and MacLurg in his service. And they had to do various martial feats to prove their worth that I won't go into details of. And this was a turning point for Bruce. And when the English were eventually expelled, Murracha was granted the lands of Risk, Mackay got the Larg, and MacLurg got Machermore. And interestingly, these families retained these lands up until relatively recently. Whether this is really how they got them or not is another question, but this is the story, this is the legend. The location where Bruce, let's say, consorted with the guidwife, the location is roughly in that photograph there with the crag of the old wife looming in the background. Now, in point of fact, when I took this photo, I had made a mistake. I thought the stones that you can maybe just make out in the foreground were the remains of what's called Bruce's Was. But in fact, they're just over there on the green grass you can see in the middle distance. This could well be enclosures associated with the Cailleach's farm. A forest road goes in between nowadays on the way to Loch Dee. This wasn't a uniquely Gaelic myth, but one of much wider provenance. But it was extremely popular and recurring in early Gaelic tradition in Ireland in particular. And the main points of the Craig na Cailleach story that accord with this legend are these. Essentially, it's about bestowing sovereignty on the future king, the Gaelic king and goddess theme. And the common themes that you can pick out in the Galloway story and in the story of Neil of the Nine Hostages and so on in Ireland are that you commonly get a hero lost. He's alone in a remote, wild place. Craig na Cailleach is that. A place that's kind of spooky, otherworld in and of itself. The hero or the aspirant king meets a solitary woman in a castle or a hall normally, and this woman, the Cailleach, is the personification of sovereignty. And the king receives sustenance and particularly a drink, and I think that was the case with Craig and Callie's story. Very often the woman had had a succession of husbands, and that we also see at Craig and Callie. And this is a representation of previous kings who had sought the approval of the Cailleach. In this case, the woman's name is recorded by, I think, Barber, another Barber later on, as Annabel, and Professor Gillies thinks this may be a possible reflex of Anya, another mythological goddess of early Gaelic tradition. And there's also the oral tradition of seeing a likeness of the Cailleach in the rock face of Craig and Callie that adds strength to the association of this with this theme. But we're blessed not just with one of these sovereignty stories in the Glenkens, but two have actually survived. Now, this wasn't written down as early as or captured as we had with the Craig and Callie one, with Barber's poem. But this is an extant local story that you can still hear people talking about today. But up at Polmadie in the Upper Glenkens, there's a ruined late medieval village. This is an illustration by Robin Aid of the mill at Polmadie. And this is how it looks today, with the same orientation, not the same tree, I'm sure. But the miller's wife represents I would put to you, the miller's wife represents the Cailleach in this story. So I'm not going to read this word for word, but essentially Robert the Bruce again was at a low ebb. He was wandering in disguise in the hills of the Kells parish, and he was needing support. He was down and out. He came to the mill. The miller's wife suspected who he was, sheltered him, hid him from the English soldiers and behind various sacks of corn and stuff like that. And eventually she was rewarded, and when he was crowned, they all gathered together and built a monument in Bruce's honor. And again, the common themes here is, can be seen here, is down and out, loyalty to the future king, sustenance and shelter. It helps him. Things turn round. A huge cairn is raised in his honor, and it's called Carlin's Cairn today, but it's probably a translation of Carn Cailleach, the cairn of the old wife, or the old woman. And that's Carlin's Cairn today, taken from Cairns Garach. And the cairn is the little nipple you can see on the left-hand peak of the hill. And I don't know how that thing was built up there, but it's a huge undertaking and befitting of a Cailleach, because Cailleachs were also well known for their extreme strength and their ability to deposit stones all over the place, to throw stones from one mountain peak to another. So this really fits well with the overall theme. Still staying on Cailleach type beings, this is very often these names can apply not just to large hills like Carlin's Cairn, but inconspicuous little mounds can have mythological associations. We've got to remember that in the past, every little stream, every little mound, every brae would have its name. And this is an example, again, from Kirkmaiden. On the OS first edition, it's Cairn Ain or Anya. Today it's called Ain Hill, so they've lost the cairn. The cairn's been ploughed out from the top of it. But Anya was a goddess of summer, wealth, sovereignty, and fertility. A good person to have on your farm, I would suggest. And it's on the former croft of Ain in Cairn, beside Cairn Garach. And you can see the OS first edition map showing Cairn Ain there, and the LiDAR image on the right-hand side, the little indentation there is the ploughed out remains of the Kist grave. And again, it's about people trying to associate prehistoric remains with something mythological. Coming back to the Glen Kens, I think there's a case to be made that Carnaval could incorporate the word for a fairy queen or banshee, Evil. The estimable place names of the Glen Kens website, which Galloway Glens helped fund, contends that Carnaval is derived from, or possibly derived from a word meaning apple. But I think that's quite unlikely in this context. And again, bearing in mind how people try to associate mythological beings with archaeological remains, I think that this type of derivation is a real possibility. Moving on, number 8, Craterus Nadara, Sheehan, fairies and fairy hills. There's a few of those scattered about. Fairies are not the fairies that we think of perhaps with little wings and something you'd find at the bottom of the garden, but very often they're pictured in Gaelic mythology as being rather splendid, not necessarily diminutive, clothed in silks and fine clothes, living in palaces under these sheehan, where they hide from view. And this again is John Duncan imagining how they would have looked. Close to here, up the Gaelic Glen, is Knock Sheen. Early spelling suggests that might be Croch and Sheehan, the hill of the fairies. And it is situated on a fairy mound, just behind the house today, actually. You can see it circled there on the map. Knocky Shee, Croch and Shee, is just off the A75, halfway between Newton Stewart and Glen Luce. And again, you can see the prominent little hill outlined there. On the ground, it's this one on the right with the pole sticking up. So again, minor features have these legends attached to them. And there's one near Dalbeattie, Colvend. I haven't got a photograph of that one, but Auchensheen, Achenchean, the field of the fairy hill, and that probably is the fairy hill there outlined in red. Moving on to Fionn MacCool and the Fianna, legendary heroes of Gaelic mythology. There's several places named after, or I would contend could be named after Fionn. And this is in Carrick, actually not too far from Girvan, and one of the most splendid hill fort, well-preserved hill fort sites you could ever want to visit. Thoroughly recommend it. This could be Dun Veen. Nowadays it's called Dun Vin or Din Vin, but the spelling suggests that this could be Fionn's fort. If so, the particular form of this place name would indicate potentially quite an early Gaelic place name in this area. I won't go into the details of that, but another one is down near Portpatrick. This rather inauspicious mound in the distance there is another Dinvin. This is Dinvin Hill. Again, this could be Fionn's fort. And a hill fort that's lost its name altogether is up at Maybole in Carrick, and it's now Howmuir, or there's a quarry, Howmuir Quarry, right next to it. And again, the earlier forms you can see there suggest that it started life as Dun Fin or Fine, and the progression of forms we see there are in line with the way that the Gaelic language has developed over the late medieval period. So again, this could be Fionn McCool's fort. It didn't just live in forts. Cairns as well, down in Kirkmaiden. Todd recorded the cairn that's now known as Eagle Cairn as Carn Finn, and that is very possibly named after Fionn McCool as well. That's the Mull of Galloway you see sticking out in the middle distance, almost looking like an island. And this is, again, down towards the Minnigaff direction between New Galloway and Minnigaff. There's an abandoned farm called Drigmorn today, and the early forms you see on the right-hand side, this is the ford across, I think it's the Penkilburn, I can't remember exactly, and that's the old farm of Drigmorn. But the early forms on the right indicate that this place could well be Durravik Morna or Durra Mac Morna, either the grove of the son or the sons of Morna, and that would be Gawl MacMorna or Gawl and Conan Mull MacMorna. So very interesting that we've got place names in Galloway that potentially go back to the tales of Fionn McCool and his band. And in fact, until this study, if these are right, there's only been one other place name in the whole of the south of Scotland outside the Highlands which related to Fionn McCool and his band. And that is this farm called Gow MacMorran. And that relates to Gawl MacMorna that you can see above. And that's near Carnwath. And that was noted by Professor Watson in the Celtic Place Names of Scotland as being the only one that he'd come across in the whole area. But we potentially have added quite a few to that auspicious list. I'm not quite finished with Fionn McCool because he had a son called Ossian, which became Ossian in an anglicised form. And this is very close to Cairn Onya, or Carn Onya, down in Kirkmaiden. And you can see on the ladder, it's quite a significant protuberance. And this could be Ossian, son of Fionn McCool's hill, Crochan, Little Hill, Crochan, Ossian. However, as I said earlier about potential false friends, this is the road from Cairn Garach down to Maryport. And Croch and Ossian, or Knoch and Ossian, is the little gorse-covered hillock in the middle distance there, just where and of course the road bends there, doesn't it? Corner, potentially. So I just mentioned that again as a self-correcting cautionary tale that we have to be careful. We have to really research these things before making too many claims for them. However, one that I think is on stronger ground, firmer ground, is the hill that no longer exists, roughly where it says Sawmill on the OS first edition map of 1850-ish. And that is, or that was Knock Ossian. It now survives in Knock Cushion Street, which is an interesting anglicisation. And that was where justice was meted out in that part of Carrick. And it's recorded specifically to that effect. But the hill was demolished, and I think there's or at least last time I was there, swimming baths or something on the site of the Hill of Justice, Ossian's Hill. I'm going to finish off now, I think. Time, okay? Oh, it's 5-2, right. You've done well sticking up with this so far, especially in this heat. Finish off with Christianization, because this is another interesting process. That's happened with the landscape. DAMP, the Dumfries Archival Mapping Project, scanned a map of Kirkcowan, and on there was this word that's hard to discern. I went to look at the map in its original, and this is on the Tarf, and it is in fact Lyn Ivreige, the pool of St. Bridget, and it's on the Tarf, which is on Taraf the bull, or its Brittonic predecessor. And this is the pool itself. So, you know, we've got a link here from, you know, presumably this would have been a pre-Christian revered site, and how it's been Christianized. And it's fantastic to think we can go and have a swim in St. Bride's pool on the Tarf. Another example is just down the Tarf. You can't make that out probably, but it's Lyn Cowan. And this is the pool there on the Tarf, further downstream from St. Cowan on the Tarf. Again, this would be no doubt an attempt at Christianization of sacred water features. So I'm going to finish off really with just a picture I happened to take kind of almost at random the other day on the road between Dalry and Kendune, and looking over to the Rins of Kells in distance. And what I think I would ask you to take from this is that potentially Galloway is what I would call a submerged mythical landscape. It's there, but it's hidden. It's hidden by Anglicization, by 200 or 300 years since Gaelic was spoken, by the Reformation. All these stories would have been cast into the dustbin, basically, because, you know, it was not the thing after the Reformation. But there, looking at that scenery, you can pick up several of the names we've talked about before: Carlin's Cairn, Carnacallicky, potentially Niall Fowler. In the foreground, Drumnambudgeach, the ridge of the witches. Crosha, a hill with a cross. In the foreground of the minister's moss, that would be given to the Dalry minister to cut his peats in. And over in the background, we've got Carnaval. So it's a rich landscape, a rich mythical landscape, that by peeling away the meaning from these place names and stories, we can actually get under the bonnet of and understand the place a bit more. So last slide, the Reformation and the English Bible, I think, did much to bring about the end of Gaelic in our area. And it would have, the Reformation in particular, would have fundamentally affected these beliefs and, frankly, the acceptability of these beliefs in the local area. But despite it, there are plentiful remains of place names and stories, as I hope I've demonstrated a little bit over the landscape of Galloway, that shows that there was a rich belief in the Galloway Gaelic Otherworld. And I'll rest my case there.
I can stand beside you. I'll stand just slightly up. I'll just stand on slightly uncomfortably close to you, Michael, if that's all right. Lots of nice feedback that I won't bore you with now, Michael, but anything about how people tried to protect themselves from these creatures? Was the rowan tree a protector? And are any other customs or beliefs about protection? Have you picked up on any protection from creatures?
There are lots of place names incorporating rowan. Curan is the word for rowan in Gaelic, and there are plenty of place names incorporating that. Whether you could tie that into a particular supernatural tale or not is another matter. But you know, a few hundred yards from where we're standing just now is Balmaclellan graveyard, and if you walk into that graveyard, around the gate is a trained rowan tree. So I presume that's an example of that protective power.
Brilliant. If you mentioned a few sources, is there any particular source that you'd like to mention to the audience about where this has helped you, or this is
anybody interested in place names of Scotland needs to consult with Watson's Celtic Place Names of Scotland. That's the Bible. But for the local area, of course, you've got Galloway Glens,
Great to get a mention
place
of that
names of the Galloway Glens. It's a fantastic resource. It's got mapping, database, anything in the Glenkens area, you've got good sources there. But aside from that, there's copious amounts of literature on the early Gaelic mythology that I couldn't possibly summarize.
So I'm going to humiliate myself now, but I'll give it a shot. So in amongst the place names linked with Criterion Osnadara, you have mentioned some cairn sites. Have you found any similar place names or story links with stone circles or standing stones at all?
Nothing that I could relate so far to early Gaelic mythology. There are plenty of standing stones in the landscape. There's one close here on the home of Dalaran. But so far I haven't found any with like Clach Four or something like that. I haven't found any stone with that direct link yet.
Fascinating question.
But it's early days.
Just option, anyone in the room want to jump in at all? Yes, I might just give you this just so people at home can hear if that's okay.
Oh, right, okay, thank you. Can I just say, first of all, what a fabulously interesting talk. Really, really great. Can I just make a closer like that? Is that okay? Can I just make a wee suggestion that might be completely nonsense? Mm-hmm. When you were talking about Nsach Ban, you know, a white sack, yeah, okay, but wouldn't it be nice if somehow or other the first word could mean a humanoid, a person, mm-hmm. something like that? And you were saying, I think, if I heard you correctly, that the posh folk said sedge ban. Mm. Well, that reminded me of, now I think it's maybe in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, 14th century north of England narrative poem, that sedge, S-E-C-G, I think, is a word for a bloke. Mm-hmm. I've no idea where the word sedge came from. Has it got a Gaelic origin, or was it a loan word into Gaelic perhaps at that time?
The honest truth is I don't know. Worth following up on that point. I think on the sedge band thing that Trotter talks about in his book, if you read Trotter's books, he's got a thing about what he calls gentilization. He rails against it. So, you know, almost in every story he talks about how, you know, Jock McWhamrach has changed his name into being John, you know, something much more polite. So he detests this, and that's just another example of him saying, well, we've perverted the Seke Bon to sedge band. So whether he's carefully recorded a form there, or he's just using it to make a point about the beastliness of this gentilization thing, I'm not sure, but that's worth following up on.
Brilliant. I've got one more question online. Just last chance. There's one more question online. Hi, there was brought up on the Rins. One of the tales was told many times the story of Aiken Drum, a very frightening fairy who was reputed to visit Luce Bay. Do you think this has roots in the Galloway Gaelic tradition? Also, we knew the area around Millfire and Millfore as the Awful Hand, with an area of moraine known as the Devil's Bowling Green, which seems to tie in your descriptions of Millfire. So first of all, about Aiken Drum, does that...
Yeah, I haven't come across a Gaelic word for brownie or bruni. That's a subspecies of these supernatural beasts that we've been talking about, and they were very common. Aiken Drum's a very famous poem about that particular type of creature, but I haven't come across that captured in place names in Gaelic here. But interestingly enough, and this is just very, very much kind of hot off the press in a sense, I've been talking. And I should actually acknowledge Alan James for his assistance in various of these discussions and ideas, although the propositions I put forward are entirely my fault. But I was again looking at Trotter's Wigtonshire book the other day, and he mentions a brownie or a bruni story, I forget where exactly, somewhere in Wigtonshire. And he mentions in the story that the bruni was called Mackin. So he captures the name of the brownie or bruni, Mackin. And that looks very much like the Gaelic word macan, a young lad, a young boy, diminutive of mac. And if so, that would be a very interesting capturing of the personal name of a Bruni. So we've got to follow up on that one.
And anything about the Orpha hand, does that cross your...
What was the question about that again?
It was we knew the area in Millfire and Millfour as the Orpha hand, with an area of Moraine as the Devil's Bowling Green. Which does seem to tie in with the descriptions of Millfire and Millfour.
Millfire and Millfour are in a different location from what's been referred to there. The Devil's Bowling Green is on the top of Craignaw, Dungeon Hill, between the Merrick and Rins of Kells.
Okay. Brilliant. Excellent talk. I wondered if the OS name books shed any light on the origin of false friend place names. Did they help?
Yeah, again, I didn't. I mean, I took quite a long time to go through this as it was, so there was no possibility to discuss the particular information contained in the OS name books. If any of you, somebody asked about sources earlier, and if anybody is following up on place names, do look at the online repository of. Just type in ONSB and you'll find the Ordnance Survey name books. And the surveyors tried, where possible, to put in a rationale for the name, and quite often they were, kind of wild suggestions, but very often they contained a kernel of something, and quite often reflected what people thought locally. So.
It depended on that person making the effort and
it depended on the kind of sapper who was doing it, and it depended who they were talking to. So it's a bit hit and miss, but it's a fantastic resource.
Brilliant. I'm conscious of time. Probably got one more question, unless there's any more in the room. One more question, which is: are there any other hints at the tradition of the Fianna in Galloway beyond the place names that you mentioned? Is there anything more?
No. In my defence, I would say until we did this study, there were none at all. So, as Watson in CPNS put forward, the only mention of the only evidence of the band of Fionn MacCool was Gow McMorrin. So we've added to that, but so far that's all.
We're at the cutting edge here. Then.
We're at the cutting edge, but I think like I say, we're just scratching the surface of this, and it would repay a lot more investigation. In a sense, I'm putting it out there for other people to potentially pick up and run with.
Brilliant. I'm conscious of time, and I said we would do one more, but there are a couple more questions coming in. I'll just ask one more very quickly. Does Michael feel there's any significant place names that contain giant Fomorian? Centre in Man, Galloway, and the West Coast? I saw on Michael's map only 2 locations with such place names in Ireland. Is that an accurate listed time?
Yeah, I think I tried to mention at the beginning of that section that, or maybe I didn't mention it. The word foer, derived from fomor for giant, has died out in Irish. So it's only. Scots Gaelic sometimes preserves archaic features, and it has done in the case of this word. So, although it's a legend, it comes from a legendary race, the Fomors in Ireland. The word for giant based on that doesn't exist now in Ireland. It only exists in the literary sense. So, if you're trying to find place names with foer in Ireland, you'll probably struggle. You'll struggle as well because there's a false friend, the word for autumn in Irish looks very like this as well. So
the scraps we have over here end up reflecting back on where there's a gap. Interesting.
Yeah, and you can learn a lot about early Gaelic and early Irish from Scottish Gaelic because it's preserved some of these features. And we've preserved some of these potentially in Galloway in place names.
Brilliant. I wonder, could we just do one more round of applause for Michael, because I think it was an absolutely brilliant presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just want to end with a quick reminder. So we've got the event on Monday night, 7:30 on Monday night, which is the time travelling ecologist. We've got 4 different speakers looking at historic maps Massive thanks again to Michael. This event's been recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel in fullness of time. Thank you so much to everyone here in Balmaclellan. Thank you to everyone around the world, quite literally around the world, that has dialed in to listen to us. And I think this marks the end of the session. So thank you. Thank you all very much.